pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Miller, recording, we have your info, thank you. The board met in executive session to discuss legal and personnel matters. Don't see anybody from citizens speak, so let's move into recognition.
Yeah, for tonight we have one item on here, recognizing seniors Caitlin Stanbaugh and Tyler Smith. They've been named commended students in the 2023 National Merit Scholarship Program. So congratulations to them. That's a really big deal.
All right, student council will be next week, so let's move into reports. Joni?
I'm not to be brief this evening. I just wanted to let the board know that we received an additional request from the Auditor General's office. Initially, I was told we would get a draft report in August. That didn't occur. I emailed them in September and was told we'd get the final, or the draft report late to mid-fall. In the interim, we received another inquiry. I copied all of you on that. So still no final outcome there. We are still finalizing the audit. Hopefully that is done tomorrow or Friday, so I can begin work on the annual financial reporting. I'll be reporting out to you in November. There's a transfer later in the minutes, or in the agenda this evening, that I thought I'd just do when we were in my report. Being that the audit is in the final stages of being final, we know that I know that the surplus is gonna be upwards of $6 million. I'm still waiting for a final balancing. So the recommendation was made in the Budget and Finance Committee meeting and accepted by the committee, so we brought it forth here to authorize $5 million of surplus from the 21-22 general fund to the Weilandville fund. After speaking with the auditor today, he asked that I add the words capital project fund and then a hyphen and then Weilandville project before you vote next week. So I wanted to let all of you know that I will be making that slight revision to this, if that's okay. It's just to be consistent with how we've done other transfers. The remaining balance will go to the capital reserve fund, and that the difference between those is the capital project funds, we identify specific projects. Weilandville's our last big one in the long range plan. And the capital reserve fund is for any buildings or plant or district needs of a mini project, for lack of a better word, is what the capital reserve fund has in it. And that fund, we've been able over the years to put some money aside. It had none in it when I arrived. We've added money to the general fund budget to do annual maintenance and preventative maintenance. So using that, we haven't really had to tap this capital reserve fund. So that is there for smaller projects along the way, and I mentioned that at the budget and finance meeting. But that difference between whatever our final number is and the $5 million will be there if you authorize this transfer. Any questions on that? So when we get to that.
I do have a question.
Sure.
So I'm writing this down to try to understand. So we have a capital project fund.
It has multiple projects within it.
Then we have capital reserve fund.
Correct.
And then we have general
Fund.
something fund or general fund.
General fund. That's just our operating budget. We actually have a few additional funds that, like the school tour and district activities is in a separate fund. There's a GASB fund, I'm trying to remember. We have, so in the audit report, it's really important, especially the newer board members that haven't been through an audit report with Cipher and Cipher. They'll give you their management letter and a copy, you'll get a hard copy of the audit report, and ask questions when they present that, because they come and audit us in our general fund, but they also audit our other funds. They call those the upper levels. So they'll go over that when they meet with you in November or December. It's been December the last couple of years.
I think when we were first sworn in,
It probably
we
didn't.
had a spiral of that. Okay.
And it's nice because now you'll have a whole year of the process where that was kind of like out of context for everybody. Or now you'll be able to you'll make more sense this time around.
Thank you.
And then the only other items I have this evening still are, very short in the cafeteria department. We'll be down 14 as of October 24th. However, there was a glimmer of hope today that there are, at least 5 candidates in the hiring pool. We only have 2 subs available as well. I plan to report again next month to let you know where we stand, but I wanna put it out there, on everyone's radar that just like last year when we had transportation issues and we had school closures, we can't have school if we don't feed children, if you're part of the National Lunch Program. So we might need to do some creative things. I'm gonna talk with Aaron, and we're gonna come up with a whole list of creative things if we need to go there, and I already have about 5 on my radar, that we could do so that we don't have to cancel school. But I just wanna put it out there so that you don't think that problem's been solved. It has not been solved.
Joni, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask super quick, for that national lunch program, does it have to be hot lunch or can it be?
It can be a cool lunch, and that's one of the solutions that I actually threw out there. Like I said, I'm hoping now I don't have to go to any of these, but one of them was, when I first joined the district, we didn't have cooking schools in our schools. We had satellite schools, so not every kitchen had the capability to cook. Well, we changed that because there was economies of scale and efficiencies to be able to do that in the buildings. But we used to satellite, and if we had to, we could combine our resources. We probably need to have a conversation with the union, combine our resources and maybe have some delivery, but it would have to be our workers, and we could make the meals so another time and then get it out to the satellites. The problem with that and why it's not a perfect solution is the buildings we're really short aren't our small buildings, it's our larger buildings. And that's where the problem is if it will become a point, if we don't have enough people on staff, it won't be safe to make and serve lunch. So just putting it out there so that it's not a surprise to anyone if that were to occur. I'm hoping that it doesn't. I was really hopeful when I heard today that we had some candidates in the pool.
So these 5 candidates, are they earmarked for specific schools?
I don't So normally when we post for cafeteria, we post all the open positions, so I don't know if they applied for certain ones or they just apply. That would get flushed out through the HR process.
The other question I had on free breakfast, and talking to a few of the ladies that work in the cafeterias, what type of reporting do we need to do?
So for breakfast-
Because they're saying, you got 2 lines, they're having to check them out, do this and that,
Yeah,
and it
that's
takes a while to get through, so.
Sure. So the requirement for the free breakfast is, we still have to do all reporting as if you're paid free or reduced. So you have to go through the line, you have to put your student number in, and you have to be brought in. And I understand that they don't like that, because for 2 years, we were able to do a tally system. We're no longer allowed to do that. So what we would do is people would come through and they would just go like that, because we do edit checks at the end of each month. It's what one of the girls that works for me does. And so what our edit checks do is they reconcile the computer of what we said are paid, free, and reduced to actuals. And that's when we're audited, is what they audit. Our edit checks are actually a huge component of the National School Lunch Program. So they told us, so the edit checks are done here in my office. So that's the check. Out in the buildings, everyone's doing their thing, and then we reconcile that. So they, of course, it's human nature, want to be able to do this last month, but we were told that that is not allowable. We must track free, reduced, and paid.
Any traction on lunches being free? I know there was discussion about that.
I think this is only my opinion. I just think we're far enough into the year that I don't think it would happen. But that's my opinion. I think there are still people pushing. We're in the middle right now. We do our October snapshot in terms of student numbers, but at the same time, we do a snapshot where that's happening in our PIMS world. In my world, that's why October's so busy in my office, we're doing free reduced lunch applications and verifications. So we'll be able to come out here shortly with what our percentages are for free and reduced, and that process is hopping. That didn't slow down at all. That's why my opinion is they wouldn't have had us do that to the degree that we had to do it, the scrutiny level, if they thought that that was gonna go away. But that's again my opinion.
Thank you. Any other questions for Joey? All right, Scott?
Mayor, Jenny gave me a nice segue. She talked about PIMS and enrollment October. So PIMS, it was due, I think at the end of the week in preparation for this meeting, I pulled, the date I pulled information was October 7th. But when Mary Ann showed me today, we were like one student off. So this is gonna be pretty darn accurate until tomorrow when we open, because we'll probably have a kid withdraw and 2 kids. So this is just a snapshot of this year right now. And for those of you who have been on the board before, that yellow sort of key I have down there exceeds class size in the red. It's not only exceeds the class size, but it's over the district average. Usually that chart is sprinkled with a bunch of this. And we're not in that situation this year. So very happy. Well, you guys last year, many of you were in the audience when we had to add a teacher at Hills. So it can be contentious. It's not by design, but sometimes, you know, kids enroll in a particular grade level and withdraw in another, and that just happens. So, you know, we do our best to move pieces around. And I think probably most, I guess the best reason we're not like that is because when I show you the next spreadsheet, our enrollment was pretty unchanged. We didn't really go up, we didn't really go down, but we added some staff last year when we hadn't added staff where we were. On our long range plan, we were gonna average about 5 new staff members. COVID and the year after that, we went on a hiatus. We didn't add staff. So our enrollment was going down too, and you'll see in that analysis. So, you know, we needed to catch up. Well, I think we caught up, but our enrollment also stayed flat, where we usually see about 50 students a year prior to COVID. So with that said, you know, we don't have any class size issues currently. And the dark blue at the bottom are our cohorts of grade levels that are, what I do is I take the average, and if it's 5% or greater above the average, I identify that as a larger cohort. And you see we got a lot of first graders. You know, and as they progress through the grade spans, they typically grow. And that's the result. You'll see that freshman class, it's just grown throughout its time with us. And you know, we have a couple, 2 that are 5% or greater below the average, and those are, you know, our 7th grade group right now and our 3rd grade group. So that's just a little snapshot of enrollment in general. Our average grade span, our grade level cohorts are 406 right now. So any questions on this sheet? This one's pretty, you know, benign right now because we don't have any class size issues.
So historically, freshman class has always been the biggest.
The grade levels we get there planning to move before any of those transition points. We always see a higher number than the year prior in 1st grade. And that's because we only offer a half-day program. I did a little analysis today, looking back just a couple years. It used to be, because what I was looking for was, has EDS had an impact? And granted, we only have it at a few schools, but I wondered. And so I looked back, and prior to EDS, we averaged between 12 and 15% increase. Now we're at 9 to 10. So it has helped some families, it would appear. Granted, small sampling size, just 3 years, but it did reduce that percentage. So you get a lot more in the cohort going to 1st grade, and every time we transition to a new level, when they come from grade 4 to grade 5, grade 6 to grade 7, and then the big one is 8th to 9th grade. That always jumps up. There's usually a lot of new enrollees.
Do you feel like we're on target with that demographics report?
No, I'm gonna talk about that next.
Sorry.
I don't think we are.
No, not in the numbers he's showing. So this chart is something I started when I came down here, and I know the data is valid because it's my data. Like, I couldn't really go back too far because the numbers change all the time. So this analysis, the key part, if you could see my cursor, is like right here. This is the COVID. It's just, you know, from this year we dropped 45. The next year we dropped 51. This year we only dropped 2. So, you know, we're pretty much the same. So enrollment seems to have stabilized a bit. This down here captures all of the children that I'm aware of that are school age but not inside our buildings. So these are charter, so it's not all cyber, but it's all charter school enrollments. We're We dropped by 10, from where we were last year. These are out-of-district placements. These are students who need specialized programming that we are unable to provide. They could come back. We could have new students go. These are your homeschoolers, and if you look, like these numbers right here are these are the big concerns. These are the two groups that really jumped up, once COVID hit. And then these are our private and parochial students. We saw a drop here, but that was when St. Pat's closed. And then you've seen it steadily increase to now, we're up to 381 in private and parochial. So in totality, we got over 6,000 school-aged children that could be attending. And right now we have 5273 that are, inside our walls.
So the drop in charter, are those kids coming back to us? Or we don't?
I'd have to go back to each kid and track it. I definitely, I think I reported at the start when we came back, I saw a lot less withdrawals to charter than I had seen in the past. And they come in and out. There's a family in the other day, just 3 children, 2 of them are coming back from charter, and 1 staying. As we see in the building level, people can attest to, there's not real a strong trend for this group that all of a sudden went there to stay there. They seem to go, come back.
Almost always come back.
Yeah. Now, I'm doing a lot of research in this area, and nationally, 60% of the students who are cyber charter school students were once homeschoolers. So that group of folks probably won't come back unless we offer that type of program, because one way or another, they don't want the brick and mortar traditional public school. So to Pete's question, or to Julie's, I think both of them made comments like, these are the demographic studies we've had done while I've been tracking this enrollment. And this is the most recent one. And he told us that scenario 1 was the most reliable, and he had in there that he expected us to have 5,500 kids, right now in our school. And we obviously, don't, or actually 54 from this year. He's always dead spot on this one, so I don't report it, because those are actual numbers. So this was his prediction. And if you go all the way out to, I think it's 2030, those are those numbers. So what I can tell you based on my analysis is that right now, these populations are very unpredictable, and the analytics that he uses in his statistical analysis, they just haven't caught up to this new alternative that families are attracted to. And school districts like us, well, we need to, start looking at these groups and deciding, okay, do we want to get on this train and, do something about it? Or, are we content with just that amount of kids? And I added it up. In total, that's 743 kids this represents. It's a lot of kids that, aren't attending. And so that's just something, that we'll continue to follow. See if I made any other notes. Some key things I think that you need to focus on is our next project, which here is Weilandville. You can see their trend. Keep going up and up and up, and then from here to here, this is the trailer. 50 new students, roughly, that we added out there. And the housing continues. That's an area where houses are being built with school-aged children who want to come to our school.
So looking forward with elementary, technically, we're really not prepared for this growth in just Weilandville School. If we're gonna keep, developing the area, we're not prepared from the high school level then.
Well, we built
receive these
capacity,
kids.
we built capacity into the high school and to the middle school. And we also built future capacity into the middle school project, that if the high school ever, enrollment becomes an issue, it wasn't what we wanted to do educationally to change the grade spans, but if out of necessity we have to, we can put another grade level at the middle school and add some classrooms out there.
But we probably should do another feasibility study, because you're gonna see in my audit report, we were just talking earlier, that demographic number, because that was our last study, when I have to report to our bond people, I have to use some, consistent source, so you're gonna see me reporting on a higher number. So we were talking.
I would use
probably
this
That's
as
what
your
the-
justification for, yeah, there's still, these kids are out there, and that's higher than he's predicting.
Right.
But like I said, he accounts for that. You read it in his report, but he's just not giving it enough emphasis because these numbers have increased so dramatically.
Right, but even with those numbers and those jumps, the net is still flat or a little minus in total enrollment, right?
No, if all these kids came,
No, if all of them came, I'm saying what we are today.
he,
A jump in Wylandville, right?
yeah.
Then how does that progress through? Because as a total community, we're 5,300, or we've been right around, right?
Yeah, the growth until here. You look right there, this was how many new students we got since 2010. That's a lot of kids.
Right.
So, and then it's, but, yeah, it's what will the future hold? Will this be the most, or will we remain flat? I don't know. But right now, this trend right here, Wylandville obviously gives us issue, and the predicted enrollment for elementary is, set to continue to increase. So we will use the demographic study to right-size that building out there. And that building, because it will pull in Borland Manor and some of South Central, and will rebalance the other side of the district. Because we did use to a capacity of, 850, 900 if we wanted to. There's about 750 there right now. But, ideally, it'd be nice if they're around 650, because it's just a lot of children in the center. So if we could balance the district, hopefully enrollment does remain manageable so that we can do that balancing. If not, we've built in capacity. And I think Pete may have alluded to this. Not sure if it was exactly what he was alluding to, but you see the Wylandville growth? Well, Wylandville is a feeder for North Strabane growth. They go up and down depending on the cohort, but they're 430 right now. And that's a pretty high number for them. The only thing that jumped out on that demographic study that really made me sort of sit on the edge of my seat was his future predictions for the intermediate level. Like, wow, we could put 550 in there, but he was predicting more. Hopefully that doesn't happen, because that will, I don't know. We may have a trailer in intermediate school temporarily.
Well, it wouldn't be a bad thing, right? That
No.
kids want to come here and everything else, it's just now we have to build the capacity.
Yeah, I think COVID opened people's eyes to alternatives to coming, and I think that's just truly a new consideration that we need to be somehow blending in with what we do, so that the education rigor and the our curriculum is what these kids get.
And that's the now reaction to, folks that want their kids to be home safe, whatever, but if we see in a year or two that now they're behind, which we read these reports that this isn't as great as we think it is, it'll start to show up soon. So we're, being prepared, and then I wonder if we're looking at preschool levels too, and adding that into what is coming.
I can tell you that this last year's cohort and this year's cohort of kindergartners overall performed lower than our other, because they didn't have access to preschool, so that they were closed, parents weren't sending them. So yeah, we're still going to see these impacts long through.
Hopefully we'll pull some back when we get our cyber program.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the target, that 226.
Yeah.
The research at Scott students quite revealing, especially about that home school piece, because knowing that's important for us in our future planning. Because all those other non-public school traditional paths below the charter school are kind of stable for the most part, but it's the charter school students, which most are cyber, right, Scott, most likely, that's trends huge upward.
And those encompass from K to 12.
Yeah, that one sheet I had given you last year, I sort of carved out the brick and mortar charters. So they're a whole different animal that I don't think we're ready to kind of tackle. Yeah, so much goes into, you know, these efforts that we don't have the luxury of just sort of splashing out in a bunch of directions. So we want to be very deliberate and focus on, you know, what what possible groups we can see the most gains in. I'm trying to think if there's anything else with this. Yep, that's it.
Any other questions for Scott? Thank you.
Thanks.
Tim?
Yeah, so I'll try to be brief with mine as well. Two components tonight, first being staffing. So we've slowed down quite a bit on the professional side with our recruiting and our postings. And happy to report to you that most of the professional hires that you approved back in August and September are now in place. So typically what happens is once our board approves these professional hires, they go back to their district and inform them that they're leaving, and they get held for 60 days. So they don't actually show up in our district and in our seats for a couple months. So I think last week we had a crucial hire up at Ken's building, started an English teacher, also a speech language pathologist that started. I think those were the last two stragglers we were waiting on, so things have slowed down a little bit. That said, we do have some resignations and retirements for you to approve next week. We have one elementary teacher, we have a para educator at the middle school level, and we're gonna be looking to backfill that maintenance employee as well. So slowed down, but there's always kind of a slow trickle that we'll be on with recruiting. In addition, Jody talked about her need in cafeteria. We were glad to report to her today that we do have 5 of them in the pipeline, which will hopefully help out. Usually the hold up in getting those folks into places clearances. This time of year, the agencies that do the background checks are usually jammed, so it takes some time to get those fingerprints and clearances back. So we'll continue to work with her department on trying to get those needs met. So moving on to branding. We did have a branding committee meeting last Tuesday, October 4th, and during that meeting, one of the components that we discussed is how are we going to disseminate our new brand. We wanted to make sure that there was a controlled system and a controlled methodology for us actually getting that artwork and those logos and those brands out to internal and external customers. So we agreed that probably most of the custody of those files needs to shift over to PR, to public relations, which is Morgan's department. So we talked about a system that we will use for Morgan to kind of vet how those files are going to be used and put some parameters around the use of those files so that it's not the Wild West, and there's a good controlled system for us to disseminate those, but we're excited about that. Also, we discussed the scheduling of the Brand Splash event next Friday at the high school at 2 o'clock. We're working with Mr. Crowley on kind of what that looks like, and we've got some details to work out yet. But once we get that finalized, I'll throw out an email to the board, and you're all invited to come next Friday at 2 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, for your support in that endeavor. Very much appreciate it. All right, that's all I got.
Any questions for Tim? All right.
To continue the data theme for tonight, can I stand very much? Sorry. Are you all right with
You're
that?
good.
Okay. So, Mr. Daniels asked to give a brief, emphasis on brief, so it will be brief, overview of our data warehouse. And we've had a data warehouse. In general, what's a data warehouse? It houses all our data as it pertains to student achievement data. And actually, our new one will do a little bit more than that, and I'll explain that in a moment. But we've had a data warehouse in place since 04, 05, I want to say. It was actually the first thing I was asked to do as an administrative intern, like a district-wide initiative. And it was called Performance Tracker. And that was bought over a few different times, different companies. Eventually, the company that owns PowerSchool, which is our student information system, bought Performance Tracker. but they bought it out for the primary reason that just kind of not updated anymore. Their primary vehicle for their data warehouse is Performance Matters. Performance Matters is where they're going to put all their research and their updates into. So it just made sense for us to gravitate over to Performance Matters, and I'm proud to say that after last spring and this summer, doing all the back-end onboarding stuff that needed to be done and some of the training needed to be done, that's done in place, and it's up and running, and it's running pretty darn smoothly as a result. So depending on if you're an administrator or a teacher, you're going to be able to log in, or they can log into a dashboard. And when they log into a dashboard, they're going to have access to a variety of different data related to their students and whatever pertaining to their students as far as classes, schools. So if I'm a middle school principal, I log into Performance Matters. I have access to my particular school's data as far as attendance, assessment, discipline, so on and so forth. This is just a snapshot of my screen, so it's the entire school district. So I can see trends in absence rates right away. This is always the day before. It's a pretty powerful data performance tool. I'm going to actually show you. This is live. This is Scott's screen, so he has access to the entire school district. So he could scroll over and see, okay, on a particular date, how many students were absent. It allows us to quickly assess what's going on. Gives you a quick snapshot of a variety of different data sources. Pretty powerful in that regard. Make sure we're done with it here. So everyone's identities are hidden here, so we're doing anyway. So from a teacher standpoint, they'll see all their teachers or their students in their classes. And what's nice about this from a teacher or school admin or guidance counselor, they can pull up their student, they can see their class schedule, their attendance rate, discipline flags. Right now it said if a student has 3 or more discipline events, it will flag as an early warning system. So for us, a teacher, a guidance counselor, administrator, if a student pops up, if they've been in some kind of discipline event 3 times, that's a warning to us that we need to put some intervention in place to help that student out, what's going on with that student, find some trends. Same with absence, and a quick snapshot of grades as well. So it's powerful in that regard as far as live data and looking up that and just have one-stop shop for all those data sources. Instead of going to this program, going to the student's file, it's all located here. And there's huge potential moving forward as far as some of the assessments we do at different levels of integrating, putting it in this data warehouse. So this is the only place you'll need to go as far as a teacher or a guidance counselor or administrator. Is that my time limit?
Yes.
I think that was more than 3 minutes.
Sorry. So, as educators, it's important to make sure we're making data-driven decisions. And as far as a curricular standpoint and instructional standpoint. So there are 3 powerful reports in here that I'll go over real briefly. There's a scoreboard report, a baseball card report, and a student item analysis report. So you can see there's like a baseball theme here that they use. The scoreboard report gives you the overall how the team is doing. So how is the class doing? How is the school doing? I'll show you an example. The baseball card report is flip over the other side, check the stats out. How's the individual student doing as far as student achievement, attendance, discipline, so on and so forth. And then there's a student an item analysis, which is my favorite report. I'll show you in a second. So I know this is hard to see, but this is a scoreboard report. So as an administrator, if I'm looking at this and this particular, what is it, small? This particular exam is a PSSA, I think it's geometry standard, yeah, I can see that. And if I want to see how our students performed across the board in that geometry standard, wherever the geometry standard was assessed on that PSSA last year, I can see that across all the schools. I could then start to add filters. So I want to see the next one over is 7th grade. How did my 7th graders do on the geometry standard? I could identify that and see that as a whole. How did my 8th graders do? Did I see growth there? So it allows us to see that overall picture, that global picture of how students are performing both overall on whatever assessment you're talking about, and also in a particular standard or strand, which I call it. This is a baseball card report, so this is a student. So if I want to see how a student performed on a particular assessment, and again, it doesn't have to be a PSSA or a Keystone, that's all in here. But it's also our local assessments we can place in Performance Matters too. So right now, we've put all our benchmark assessments in this system, and we've started to give the benchmarks in our schools. So we're allowed, which is probably the most effective assessment for us to make local quick decisions as far as instructional standpoint. So this tells me quickly how individual students are doing overall on an assessment, or if I want to start looking at their strands or standards, I can do that as well. But the report that we'll be using most often is that student item analysis. And this is quite powerful. So from a teacher standpoint or a principal standpoint, I could look at this particular benchmark, which was just given last week, Language Arts 7 benchmark nonfiction. All the 7th graders, or most of them, took this exam. You see there's one team that still needs to take it. I think they took it today, actually. So out of the 218 students that took this exam, 82% score, so that's in a proficient or better range. That's looking good so far. So right away, from a principal standpoint, we're trending in the right direction there. I like what I'm seeing. If I'm a teacher looking at this, I'm just seeing my class, so they can see how their class did. So if they need to spiral back and reteach, they can do that. They can drill down even further to see how their individual students performed on an overall proficiency level, and then see what individual questions they missed. So if I'm a teacher, and for example, for this first question, 83%, almost 84% of the students answered that correctly. I'm moving on, I don't have to worry about it. The next two questions, 68% and definitely 56%, those standards, I'm probably going to want to revisit those, because if roughly half the kids are missing that, I want to go back to that, reteach it somehow, or incorporate it somehow in my teaching. So it gives them that quick data to make a data-driven instructional decision, a formative type of decision throughout the school year, which we want to do. We don't want to wait till the end of the school year, give them a PSSA, and try to, it's too late then. So we want to make those adjustments as we go along through the school year. And what's important about this is making sure that everyone's a part of this process. We present it and we use it in a low stakes approach. We don't want to put a high stakes approach to it, because if you add too much pressure, then you're not going to get accurate data. So we want to make sure that teachers are part of this process, and we're having data meetings and we're collaborating. An example would be if I was teaching, or if I had some teachers in 7th grade, and I see a particular standards low across all 3 or 4 teachers. Most likely it's probably a curricular decision. What in the curriculum is showing us that we need to address that particular standard better. If maybe 3 out of 4 teachers have high scores, 1 teacher has a low score, okay, what's going on in that classroom from an instructional standpoint do we need to adjust to make sure that those kids in those classrooms are up to the same standard everyone else is. So quite powerful, a little bit geeky, I know, but get excited about this stuff. And that concludes my presentation. Question?
Where the data feeds into this? Where do the teachers input this stuff, guys?
Good question.
Where are the feeds coming from?
So our student information system, PowerSchool, feeds into it nightly. Okay, so that's attendance, discipline, grades, things like that. Our learning management system feeds in; they communicate with each other. So that would be Schoology in the 5 through 12 range. It talks to Schoology. We can actually give our benchmarks now through Schoology, our learning management system, through Performance Matters. Before, when we did benchmarking with Performance Tracker, they would take their benchmarks on a bubble sheet, so we'd print bubble sheets. And they would take on the bubble sheets, and they would turn the bubble sheets in, and would scan all those bubble sheets. It was time intensive. It took probably roughly about a week to get that data to the teachers. Now we have the option to do this online. So grades 3 through 12 are now doing their benchmarking online. K1 and 2 will do benchmarking traditionally on paper, it's just more appropriate. So the data's quick, all our systems are talking, so it's almost all automatic. Yeah. Yeah, or on our server, yeah.
So this will help with our assessments that we did during our workshop to figure out what was the most important, critical areas of the district when we had our ESP
Oh, yeah, well,
workshop.
we didn't really have new state data. We were looking at data that was 2 years old.
Okay.
Now we'll have this last year's data and our benchmarks are back on the piece, so absolutely.
And that actually brings up a good point. I looked at my 8th graders, so that last year's 8th graders' math scores were lowest they have been. And obviously COVID and all that had an impact. So if you look at it just off the bat, you say, well, those schools are low. Well, what this allows us to do, I looked at those schools, they're the same cohort in 7th grade. And while they were lower, there was less of a loss. There was growth actually between 7th and 8th grade, even though the scores traditionally were lower. So it allows us to do those types of things. So it's showing there's a bounce back, and we need to keep looking at that. And hopefully that trend is they're bouncing back academically for sure. So these tools are going to help us do that. You can't just look at it at the surface a lot of times. You got to dig into it, mine it out.
Any other questions for Greg? Thank you, sir. Ken?
Good evening, thanks for having Greg and I. We're excited to be here, excited to work with all of you in our new roles. As you know, we're still doing our current roles and this new role, so we've been slowly transitioning into our new roles. Greg and I have been meeting a lot. We just completed a curriculum audit and a textbook audit over the past few weeks to see where we are, where we need to identify what textbooks will be next up in our curriculum cycle, what areas of curriculum we still need to be writing. So we've targeted some areas, and we'll be working with Scott to update the comprehensive plan with that information. And then we also worked on establishing a 2-year goal plan where Greg and I see us be 2 years from now, with a focus on the cyber school, a focus on curriculum, and a focus on textbooks. That's it.
Any questions for Ken?
Yeah. Not senior skip day,
So actually, better than in the past, because we gave the seniors and the freshmen, this is our PSAT day. So traditionally it's focused on our 10th and 11th grade students. To try to counteract that to an extent, we incorporated activities this year for the first time for 9th and 12th grade. So our 9th graders had career exploration activities that they were doing. So instead of them just being in a classroom for 2.5 hours while the 10th and 11th graders were taking the PSATs, they worked on that. And then we tried to build upon the college and career fair that was held at Bethel Park last night. And we had an applications workshop for our seniors in our auditorium and gym. We talked about the Common App. We talked about how they could sync Zello to the Common App. We talked about FAFSA. We had people come and talk about how to write a proper college essay for their application. And then we had Coach Evans also did an NCAA, NAIA cert session with our student athletes. So not as much of a skip day as it was in the past, and we know there's still room to grow in that area too. So
I also heard today where it was like TIAA was going to go through NIL for high school.
yeah, they have one more review of that policy, and they said that if they approve it at the next PIAA board meeting, it could take immediate effect. But they said that they use California as their benchmark because they have a lot more student athletes than we do, and they said it's such a small percentage of the student athletes that are taking
Well, especially
advantage
because
of
there's
that.
certain things that they won't be allowed to
Correct.
represent or whatever.
Yeah.
So, okay, Morgan, anything? Good. All right, next week's meeting, we'll look at approving the minutes from the September 22nd board meeting, budget and finance on the 4th of October, the branding committee meeting on the 4th, and tonight's agenda meeting. We will then look at the financial approvals. If anybody has any questions on the wage tax report. All good? Treasurer's report, Joni, you said that would be forthcoming. Bills for ratification and approval. Any questions on those? Budgetary transfers. And transfer surplus money, as Joni spoke about earlier. All right, Michael?
Well, the same is true, for your approval for next week, we have the personnel sheets and the substitute list, as presented. The tax collector bonuses, we could have two, we have one right now.
So
Yeah, I was
just,
gonna ask, why,
yeah, I
for
wanted
the
to,
sake of,
Rob was, so the auditors, our tax collectors are also audited, and when you run for tax collector, there's a certain criteria that you have to meet to be a tax collector, and a number of years ago, the board, offered a bonus to our tax collectors, because there were some, their salaries based on how many tax parcels they have, it's $1.50 per parcel, but because some do a better job, the board offered this bonus structure, so we take the qualifications that are needed and are required, and they monthly reconciliations, and there's a rubric that's attached to it. But one of the items on the rubric is how well they did on their audit. And Cipher and Cipher, who is our auditor, is also Canonsburg, actually all three, that is their auditors. They finished Rob, and he was within 28 cents, so she gave him the highest amount. So with his other scores on the rubric, he'll get a $5,000 bonus. She's not done with Dawn yet, and then Jordan never makes the bonus. So Jordan Tax Service is a service, and then they delegate it to a person. That's probably not the wrong word. There's a person that does it on their behalf, but it's Jordan Tax Service. So they don't complete the things in the rubric because they just don't. So they typically never get the bonus. But usually Dawn and Rob get something. And usually Rob gets the highest.
so might show up next month then?
Yeah, I asked her earlier this week, later last week, if she had finished Nurse Trevania, and she had not.
Alright, thank you.
Next item is, the tax assessment appeals. We have a couple of items, as were discussed in the, real estate committee meeting, this week. And, we would ask the clerk board to authorize Peacock Keller, our real estate counsel, to appeal these, parcels by number as presented. Next item, under contracts, agreements, and proposals, at this time we have one, and that is a result of the negotiations committee, having a meeting, and determining, to go this way for legal counsel as we approach, the renewal of contracts and the negotiation period that's coming up. Next item is a stipulated adjudication, as was discussed in executive session, for your approval. Change orders for the new middle school. There is a, building and grounds committee meeting on October 18th, a couple days prior to the voting week. We will be, discussing these items, but shelving for athletic storage, dividers in the athletic storage area, vinyl graphics, and a change order for cabling at the new middle school. All of those items will be, filled in, the dollar amounts and what have you, in time for, the agenda setting for, October 20th. Next item is a contracted carrier agreement. This is an agreement for, with an individual parent to transport, a student to Pittsburgh Behavior Services at $78 a day. Sometimes we, offer, the parent, to make the run, and, sometimes for the student, that's the best arrangement, and that's what we have in this case.
Now, is that dollar amount based on mileage, or is that a standard per diem?
It could be based on the IRS, mileage rate, per mile rate. Next item is a survey, and this is a student from Point Park University, who is wanting to focus on, Weilandville Elementary School based on the fact that they have achieved, tier 2 with fidelity, in the PBIS model, and that was reported as a recognition item to the board, last month. So this student has taken notice of school districts throughout the region, if not the state, and, wants to do a study in that area. If we have all of, the information we need necessary in time for next week, this item will stay on here. If not, then we will remove it and add it to the agenda perhaps, in the following month. Next item is, Act 57 resolution, and Ms. Mansman, do you care to speak about that?
This is the one that, Anderson Price had given to us to add. It was part of the, school code bill that
as Tony said, it will not have a great impact really on Canon-McMillan, probably any other school district. It's very unusual circumstance where somebody has moved in, they don't get the taxes notice of it, and if they can show that they've met the criteria, then the penalty and interest will be waived. Doesn't happen very often, but every once in a while we do see it. Prior to Act 57, you had no power to forgive that, even though it was an innocent situation. This hopefully will rectify that type of situation. I think what you'll see though is a lot of people saying, well, I didn't know my taxes were due, and can I get Act 57? It just really won't apply to the vast majority.
And we've been pretty consistent over the years, that people have at times come and said they didn't know their deadline, and the board has never, to my knowledge of 15 years, ever deviated just because once you open that door. But we'll give these to the tax collectors and they'll manage that from if they have somebody come in, it meets this criteria.
It's a fairness.
Yeah, but I don't expect a big impact.
Thank you. And the next item is lawn services proposal. Our lawn services contract was 3 years, it's expiring, and time for bid proposals. Indeed, that bid opening will occur on the morning of the 18th, and in time for the board agenda to go out later that afternoon. So we will have that blank filled in with the lowest bidder, lowest responsible bidder. Mr. McCullough spoke of the branding splash event, and that's an approval item we'll have for you for next week. Expenses for supplies for the entertainment for that event, and we were asking that that be a retroactive approval to October 6th, based on the outcome of a committee meeting to make that happen. So that appears there not to exceed $7,500. Disposal of property. We actually had a similar item on the agenda last.
I was gonna say, there's more books?
Yes.
Where'd these come
Many more,
from?
yes.
This is Liz's favorite.
It was a question we had last month about, where are they, what's this about? So it's just more weeding out of, books that haven't been checked out for a really long time, or books that just have no useful value to the district.
42 pages.
Well, there are tabs in the Excel sheet, and she put them all in, but the blue highlighted ones were already done.
Okay.
So the first section, I think it's fiction. I mean, looking at the titles, I blew it up, I'm like, yeah, that's a fiction one.
This will be nonfiction.
Or this one's not, so it's the reverse.
Yes.
I knew it was one or the other, so
Yeah.
whichever one is white was done, the blue is what's now.
Do we expect more, or is this pretty much?
No, we expect this. We're remodeling our library. We have some new furniture on the way, some new bookshelves on the way. We want to really get more students in there throughout the course of their day and utilize it during their study halls, during their lunch periods. So we're gonna have that in there. So we're excited for that, and I know that really all the buildings hadn't done weeding in a long time. So we updated the policy to reflect that, and this is the efforts of the librarians based on that policy being updated, so.
And this next item is a donation. The donation is for student supplies valued at $1,150 from You Bet Pilot Car Service. You wonder, what heck supplies are they providing? They're really like what, disinfectant and things that'll be housed in the nurse's office, is that correct? For students to use, those kinds of things. So yeah, it really doesn't, the name of the company, the LLC, doesn't really give away the actual products that are being
They donated shampoo, conditioner, hairspray, gel, things that our Santa Fund would traditionally provide to our students. They're just supplanting that and giving us extra resources for our students who need them.
And then the last item on this agenda involves donations received, which I'll read for you at next week's meeting.
Ken, how's the Eagle Scout project going?
It is going well. We met with him the other day, and he's gonna get working on it now, so, yeah. And the other one's working out beautifully with our preschool kids. They've been utilizing it with the nice weather, the one we had done over the summer. So we're excited for this new one, so he's gonna get started on it. He was waiting for football season to end because he's playing football right now.
I think I'll add too, that he's gonna be selling Moe's pizza, Moe's taco kits, right? And, yeah, so if any of you are interested, I'll tell him to make sure he, gives us some order forms. We can distribute them. I told him I wanted one, so whenever they're ready, I'm hoping to see it.
Any other comments, questions?
Just because you asked about the Eagle Scout project, I do have to bring something up that's just a little bit of frank. Last week I was at a function up in North Hills. My niece, Anna, young fellow, became the first female Eagle Scout in the Western Pennsylvania area. In 2018, there was like this formal merger where girls are now allowed to formally participate in their services. And it was really interesting ceremony when you had the brothers of like 20 older men that were all Eagle Scouts. One guy was talking about how he wished it had happened back when he was younger because his daughters didn't have the opportunity to do that. But so yeah, it's quite the ceremony. If you ever get it, then pass together. It's a lot of fun.
Any other comments, questions? Motion to adjourn? Joe, second?
Second.
Bernie, all in favor?
Aye.